In London, the screens glow before dawn. Oil ticks down. Gold flares up. Stocks shrug and climb anyway. And somewhere behind the numbers, a sentence hangs in the air like a siren. We need total access. Not help, not support, not stability. Access to a country, to its infrastructure, to its oil. After a president is captured, the story is no longer just about Venezuela. It becomes a test of what power looks like when it stops pretending. Because here's the uncomfortable thought. If a superpower can run a nation like a corporation without spelling out elections, without spelling out a democratic transition, then the world is learning a new language. Fast, quiet, and irreversible. So in the next few minutes, I want to walk you through the machinery behind this moment. Not the headlines, the mechanism, the logic that turns geopolitics into markets and markets into fate. If you value analysis that's sharp, human, and easy to follow, stay with me and consider subscribing, because what's happening here doesn't end in Caracas. Now take a breath, because the real question isn't what happened. It's what exactly is being built on top of it. And that's where we go next. To understand this moment, we have to strip it down to its core. This is not simply a leadership change in a country already in crisis. It is a statement about priorities. On one side, the United States frames its move as reconstruction, rebuilding infrastructure, restoring production, stabilizing a nation with the world's largest proven oil reserves. On the other side, the details remain strikingly vague. What does it mean to run a country from the outside? What does total access look like when there is no clearly stated plan for elections, legitimacy, or a democratic transition? Inside the sample, the policy goals are spelled out with unusual clarity. Stop drug flows, gain control of energy infrastructure, ensure supply certainty for the long term. Everything else, governance, public consent, political renewal, sits in the background, unresolved. And that tension matters, because when markets stay calm, when oil shrugs and equities rally, power learns a dangerous lesson. Instability can be managed if the system keeps moving. But systems always have a cost. And to see where that cost comes from, we have to go backward before the capture, before the headlines, into the structure that made this moment possible. To see why Venezuela became this kind of pressure point, we have to zoom out in time, not in emotion. For years, Venezuela's oil sector has been shrinking, not growing. Sanctions, embargoes, tariffs, each layer reduced output, investment, and technical capacity. The country still sits on the world's largest proven oil reserves, but contributes only a fraction to global supply. That contradiction is the key. In global energy cycles, abundance without access is dead capital. And in this case, access was blocked not just by politics, but by decay. Infrastructure damaged over a decade, skills drained, capital gone. At the same time, the global market shifted. This year, traders are staring at a record oil oversupply. OPEC plus pause production. Prices soften. Risk appetite stays alive. So when Venezuela erupts politically, the market doesn't panic. It calculates. That calculation creates a window. If control can be established now, rebuilding can happen slowly over years, not months, while locking in future supply security. And that is why this moment feels less like a rescue and more like a long cycle bet. But long cycles always have breaking points. And the first one arrives faster than anyone expects. That's where we're headed next. The first shock isn't military. It's psychological. When news breaks that a sitting president has been captured, history tells us to expect panic. Oil spikes, markets freeze, capital runs. But that's not what happens here. Oil swings, then settles. Down, not up. Because traders look past the drama and see something colder. Global oversupply outweighs political shock. Venezuela, for all its reserves, has been producing so little that the immediate loss barely dents the system. That calm is deceptive, because beneath it sits a much deeper rupture. The idea that leadership can be removed, infrastructure promised to foreign firms, and a country run without clarity, without a roadmap, normalizes a new rulebook. Investors notice, so do other leaders. Gold and silver surge, not because of Venezuela alone, but because this moment signals uncertainty at the system level, a hedge against a world where rules bend fast. And quietly, bonds rally, defaulted Venezuelan debt climbs from desperation toward possibility, pricing in belief, not proof, of an economic turnaround. If you're following this closely, now is the moment to pause and reflect, because these signals matter more than speeches. But this is only the surface fracture. The real tension lies deeper, inside the machinery that makes total access possible. And that's what we uncover next. Behind every bold geopolitical move, there is a system quietly doing the work. Here, the system is not about occupation. It's about alignment. The language matters. Running a country doesn't necessarily mean installing a new government or holding elections. In this case, it means ensuring that whoever holds power adheres to specific policy goals. Those goals are clear inside the sample. First, stopping the flow of drugs into the United States. Second, gaining effective control over Venezuela's energy infrastructure. Oil is the spine of the strategy. Control the infrastructure, and you don't just rebuild production, you shape supply, timing, and leverage for decades. And this is where uncertainty becomes structural. The acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, signals cooperation, but her mandate is weak. She must satisfy Washington while holding together military loyalty and regime hardliners at home. That balance rarely holds. No U.S. troops on the ground, at least not by design. But if governance fractures, if violence rises, the pull of involvement grows stronger, even against stated intentions. This is how systems trap their creators, not through ambition, but through unresolved mechanisms. And when that tension spills over, it doesn't stay inside borders. That spillover is already beginning. The second crisis doesn't arrive with tanks. It arrives with hesitation. U.S. oil companies are invited back in. Billions of dollars, the promise goes. Rebuilding pipelines, refineries, ports, turning the world's largest oil reserves back into flow. But the industry pauses because oil doesn't run on optimism. It runs on certainty. Executives look at Venezuela and see a decade of decline. Nationalized assets, seized operations, legal disputes that still linger. They hear talk of total access, but no clear laws, no new framework, no guarantees that today's permission won't become tomorrow's expropriation. And even if politics stabilized tomorrow, physics would not. Successful drilling takes time. 1 year, 2 years, sometimes more. Infrastructure repair stretches into half a decade, even longer. Meanwhile, prices are soft. Global supply is already heavy. Heavy oil, like Venezuela's, carries higher costs and thinner margins. So the contradiction sharpens. The geopolitical move is fast. The economic payoff is slow. Markets sense this gap. That's why optimism floats, but conviction doesn't lock in. And while capital waits, pressure builds elsewhere. On ordinary people, on daily life, on those who don't trade futures or hedge risk, that's the next fracture line. And it's the most human one of all. Now let's bring this down to street level. Because while markets debate timelines and companies debate terms, you don't live in a balance sheet. You live in uncertainty. If you're Venezuelan, leadership has changed, but your life hasn't yet. Jobs don't return overnight. Power grids don't heal because a press conference promises billions. Food prices don't fall because oil futures stay calm. And here's the cruel paradox. The more strategic a country becomes, the less visible its people often are in the decision making. You're told stability is coming. You're told patience is required. You're told Sacrifice is necessary for long-term recovery. But you've heard this before. Meanwhile, acting leadership is caught in a vice. Cooperate too much with Washington, and you lose domestic legitimacy. Resist, and you invite pressure you cannot absorb. That tension doesn't stay abstract. It shows up as stalled wages, as nervous migration, as fear that violence could return if authority fractures. So when analysts talk about a 5 to 8 year rebuild, understand what that really means. It means years of waiting while the system decides whether you matter. If this resonates with you, if you care about what geopolitics does to real lives, stay with me. These stories deserve attention, not indifference. Because this isn't just about Venezuela anymore. The ripple is moving outward, and the world is already responding. What happens next doesn't stop at Venezuela's borders. It never does. The signal travels fast. From Caracas to Copenhagen, from oil markets to the Arctic. When President Trump talks about needing Greenland for national security, about ships, resources, control other capitals, listen carefully. Not to the justification, but to the pattern. This is power framed as necessity. Security blended with economics. Geography turned into leverage. Russia hears it through the lens of Ukraine, where troops already sit on the ground. China hears it through Taiwan, asking whether intervention is conditional now, transactional, interest-based, selective. Even if no one moves immediately, the message lands. The world is sliding toward clearly marked spheres of influence, where the unspoken rule is simple. Don't disrupt my business, and I won't disrupt yours. Markets reflect that adjustment. Asian equities rise. Tech rallies. Risk stays on. Not because the world feels safer, but because capital adapts faster than politics. It prices in fragmentation, not cooperation. This is what a new order looks like at birth. Not chaos, but coordination without consensus. And once that logic takes hold, the future narrows into a few stark paths. That's where we go next. When you project this forward, 3 futures emerge. Not fantasies. Logical extensions of what's already in motion. The first is the optimistic path. Political stability holds just long enough. A framework emerges slowly for investment, security, and partial legitimacy. Oil production crawls back over years, not months. Bonds recover. Venezuela re-enters the system, imperfect but functioning. This is the future markets want to believe in. The second is the middle path, and historically the most common: control without consensus. Infrastructure rebuilds unevenly. Oil flows improve, but governance remains fragile. The acting leadership survives, but legitimacy never fully arrives. Growth exists, but it's brittle, always vulnerable to the next shock. Then there's the darkest path: fragmentation. A weak mandate collapses under pressure. Violence returns. The system that tried to avoid deeper involvement gets pulled in anyway, piecemeal, reactively. None of these outcomes hinge on oil alone. They hinge on whether power can coexist with restraint. History suggests that's rare. And that brings us to the final question. Not about Venezuela, about the world being built around it. That's where we end. Step back for a moment. Look at the pattern, not the personalities. What we're watching is not just the removal of a leader or the rebuilding of an oil industry. It's the normalization of a worldview where access replaces consent, and stability is defined by markets, not people. Venezuela becomes a case study. Greenland becomes a question mark. Gold becomes a refuge. And power becomes more explicit about what it wants and less patient about explaining why. This doesn't mean collapse is inevitable, but it does mean the rules are changing in plain sight. In this world, countries are valued less for their citizens than for their position. Leaders are judged less by legitimacy than by alignment. And rebuilding is measured in barrels, bonds, and balance sheets long before it's measured in daily life. The uncomfortable truth is this: the future won't be decided by a single intervention. It will be decided by how often the world accepts this logic without questioning it. So here's my ask. If you want to understand where this new order is heading before it feels unavoidable, stay with this channel, share this analysis, keep the conversation alive, because the next chapter won't announce itself. It will arrive quietly. Already priced in,